My name is Justin Yost. I'm a developer with LoadSys. I'm going to be talking today about Composer and specifically with CakePHP and how you can make your development so much better with package managers. I'm on Twitter, GitHub, and that's my personal site. So let's get started. What is Composer? Composer is a modern PHP dependency management tool. So what does that mean? It ensures that everyone's using the same version of some set of tools. You need something in your application, whether it's Cake, whether it's some library, some vendor file, whatever. Composer will make sure that it's installed and that it's ready and that you can use it. It's the same way that you would use Git submodules if you use Git submodules, but it's better and it's much more awesome. If you've used Bundler or NPM, those are very, very similar to what Composer does. Composer does a couple of things that are very neat for PHP projects though, and we're going to talk about that as well. So what does Composer solve? We need this particular PEAR package. We need a CakePHP plugin. We need a version control package. We need Cake 2.4 or above. Composer will install all of those, manage them, upgrade them, make sure they're all set up and running properly, make sure that any sub-dependencies that they need. So if you have a CakePHP plugin that requires another plugin to operate for some reason, it'll ensure that that secondary plugin is installed. You need to ensure that the versions for everything all match and there are no missing dependencies. Composer handles all that. And Composer will install pretty much anything that you can think of. If you can write a script to install it, Composer will be able to install it. There's nothing that I've been able to find that Composer won't install more or less. How do you use Composer? Really easy. There's an installer, and you run it with PHP, and it installs it, and you've got Composer. There's also a FAR file, so if you want to throw that in, you can throw that in and use that in your projects as well. Okay, so what does a Composer file actually look like? So let's make that a little bit smaller. That's the minimum Composer file that's required. You basically just need a required line. It's a JSON file, right? You need a require, and you include the package name and then the version number that you want to include. And you've got Composer working in your project. Okay, what about a real example? Nope, that's the wrong one. Oops. There we go. No, that's not it. There we go. So what about a real example of a Composer file? So here's stuff that Composer will let you do. You can name your project. Name simply, here's the vendor, here's the name of the application. Include a description for it. Right? Set up a license. Repositories will cover that, but that's if you're needing to talk to a Git repository or an SVN repository or anything else. Require shows off, these are the packages that I need to include in this project, right? These are the things for this project to operate, to run, to be in the production site. I need that stuff. There's also, you can do a require-dev, which is the stuff that you need to do your development. So this would be something like PHP unit would be installed here, different things like that. Config sets up some config options. These are the config options that are pretty typical for CakePHP. Okay, Composer and Cake 2.4. Composer works pretty well with Cake 2.4. The documentation for this is in the book, and it's really well documented, but it's pretty simple. Basically, you include a Composer file with the CakePHP, and you bake a new Cake project. So if we take a look at that. So here's a Cake 2.4 project with a composer file. Again, name, description, license, none of that really matters. You've got some require stuff in here, right? So we're requiring that we ensure that we have the correct version of PHP, the bare minimum that we need. We ensure that we have Cake 2.4 or above. We ensure we have debug kit. We ensure we have migrations. And notice, right, we're able to define the versioning in these ways that allow us to say we need at least this, but we can go up above it, right? So this way we're saying we'll take 2.4, but we'll go up above 2.4, right? Here we have to have at least a 2.2 something branch of debug kit. Same thing for migrations. Require dev. These are the stuff that we're going to require for our development process, right? PHP unit, PHP documenter, and PHP code sniff. And then the config stuff like I mentioned before. Cake 2.4, Composer and Cake 3.0. Cake 3.0 is super easy to get running with Composer. The core team has done a fair bit of work here, and thank you for that. It's basically drop it in Composer, create project, and then tell it the project that you want to install and where you want to drop it in. And it creates a new Cake 3.0 application with everything running right away. To demo that real fast. So I've got this folder, right? And this is where I want to drop in a Cake 3 application. I've got the line of code there. That's a little too big. Oops. Run this. And we go back. And there's Cake 3. That was about as fast as I think they can probably make it. So yeah, the core team did a lot of work. So if you want to get going with Cake 3 and try it out and play with it, yeah, it's about 30 seconds of work, if that. Composer and CakePHP plugins. So all of us probably have built CakePHP plugins, or we want to use other CakePHP plugins. And if you've done it in the past, before Composer, you were probably using Git submodules, or you were dropping it in and including it manually in your Git repository, or whatever you were using, Mercurial, SVN, CVS, if you were crazy still. Composer solves this really well. Composer knows how to install and load plugins for Cake, WordPress, Symfony, Drupal, Zend, and a bunch of other stuff. It installs these just more or less by magic. That's all that you need to know, and that's all that you probably care about, is that it will install it and it knows exactly where it's supposed to load the plugin. So it's very easy to use Composer for your own stuff. Composer makes it easy for both you and your own team and the community to use your tools and plugins. And I've got an example of a plugin that's using that. So here's our sample plugin Composer file, right? We've got a name, a description. This type, CakePHP plugin, that defines for one of the things down here, this Composer installer. That's the installer that tells Composer, okay, where do I need to move this into the appropriate place to install this particular plugin? And what type of plugin is it? Well, it's a CakePHP plugin. So that says, okay, I need to throw it into the plugin folder. Keywords are some stuff for packages that we're going to talk about a little bit later. Homepage license is basically some stuff to provide information. Authors, again, information for the community, so when people have issues, they know who to get in touch with. Same thing for support. Notice, require, right? Here, it requires PHP 5.2.8 and Composer installers, right? So you can require sub-dependencies in here, and it will automatically install those dependencies as part of when Composer is going through and installing your plugin. If there's something that your plugin requires that's not there, Composer will figure it out and install it. So where should you use Composer? Anywhere that you have a dependency as part of your PHP projects is probably a good place that Composer can be used. If you have a shared PHP project that you're sharing amongst yourselves and other members of your team, Composer solves probably a lot of problems for you. Anywhere that you have a shared project that's geared towards PHP, where you're trying to solve some particular problem, it may not be PHP code specifically, but it is a problem that is a PHP specific problem, Composer would be a good thing to add to that project to make it easy for other PHP developers to use that piece of code. And it's way, way better than PEAR. If anyone's installed stuff with PEAR and you have then installed it with Composer, you will know this. It is like night and day. What all can Composer do? It doesn't have to be PHP. Loadsys, the company that I work for, we have a suite of shell scripts for all of our CakePHP packages, our CakePHP applications that we develop. Pretty much all of our applications, as you might imagine, follow a standard configuration, standard convention. And we have some shell scripts that make some of these processes that we do a lot easier. And we use Composer to load them up in all of our projects. And it works really well. And we're even using it in a 1.3 app that we still have. It doesn't have to be public facing. Composer will hook into a private repository if you have one. So as long as it is a repository that you have access to, that you can add the SSH key for or whatever, Composer will be able to hook into that. Good example of that is here. This is a private repository that I have. So I have a private repository on Bitbucket. It's just dummy thing that doesn't do anything basically. And you can see I just defined the type. I defined the URL for the repository, and it's able to pull in that dependency and the files that are associated with that project. Okay, what if the project doesn't even use Composer itself? What if you're trying to install something that isn't using Composer, but you want to use Composer to manage that dependency? Composer will install anything that's installable. I don't know the right way to word that. Composer will install anything that's backed by version control, more or less, or a PEAR package. Example of that is in here. So we've got a repository. We define the package. We define what type it is. The package, we're going to give it a name. We define a version. We define where to pull it from and where the source is. And that basically goes out and says, okay, I know your package. I know what the package name is. I know where the versions are and how to find the versions. I know where to get the files for it, and I know where to pull the source from if I have to pull the source. And with that, I can then include that as part of my dependencies. Composer create package, which is what the core team has done for Cake 3, is pretty unique to Composer. As far as I can tell, and I could be wrong about this, it doesn't look like most of the other package managers like Bundler and NPM have anything quite similar to create package. So Composer is pretty unique in this realm with create package. It'll clone a package, it'll install dependencies, and it'll run some scripts afterwards for doing initial setup and such. If you recall in the process that we did, it's the Cake app set up permissions, and it also updated the security salt in the config app file. That's a script that the Cake 3 is running after the fact, after the install is all done. Composer can even install a package globally. So for PHP unit, for instance, is a package that you may want to install globally rather than just having reinstalled for every single project. You pretty much do Composer global require package, and it'll install it to your local home.composer directory. Packagist. So Packagist, if you haven't seen it, is a repository of Composer packages for the PHP community. It's open source and you can add your own packages. It's very, very simple. And it has a ton of stuff. Show that. Anybody got a package that they think might be on Packagist that they want to find? Debug kit. Is debug kit there? Yeah, there it is. There's debug kit. Anything else? Mm-hmm. Migrations. Oh, CakeDC search is there. It just didn't pull it up at first. Migrations is there. There's CakeDCs. So packages, super easy to find a package. It is the way that you should be finding your packages and installing them, and it makes it very, very simple. You can even publish your own stuff on Packagist. From that. I had that somewhere. There it was. In this sample plugin composer file, this is pretty much what you need to publish something on Packagist. You basically just need to define a composer file and show it off and add it in Packagist, and you can pretty much walk through the Packagist process. They have instructions on the home page for adding your own package. It's very simple, very easy. Takes about 5 minutes and you're done. Status. Status is a static version of Packagist. You could use this for hosting your own internal packages. So if you have something internal that you want to be easier to be able to find and install as a dependency for your projects, rather than going through all the process that I had to do for a project that is backed by Git, Subversion, etc. That's the private that I showed. Where was that? It doesn't matter. The one that I showed that had to have backed by a private, the Bitbucket repository, rather than doing that sort of work, you can host stuff on your own private version of Packagist, essentially, and you can simply add Packagist or your internal version of Packagist, your internal status server, as a server URL, and you can post your own private packages to your status server, and it can make it easy for your team to be able to find, use, replicate, etc. Status can also act as a proxy for packages. This is becoming somewhat popular, that I've seen a fair number of teams start doing this, where one of the biggest issues that you will run into with Composer and Packagist is, since it's all backed by the GitHub API, if you're using the unauthenticated GitHub API, on occasion, GitHub will just be like, hey, so you tried reading this, and like, we're going to give you a timeout because you've been downloading, you know, like 50 some odd packages, and now you got to enter in your username and password, and then sometimes it'll create the token and sometimes it won't, and it does weird things, and it's a pain. If you run into that a lot and it becomes a problem, especially if you do deployments to a lot of servers, I would highly suggest build your own internal status server, and you can proxy it, and you can build up all your packages and dependencies to your status server, and you can serve them essentially as a cache, right? So here, go to my status server, find everything, here's the packages, and everything will just work, and you won't hit any API limits or timeouts or anything like that. So what all are we trying to do here? Composer will make your projects much, much easier to maintain. It's going to make it easier to figure out what your dependencies are, where you need your dependencies to go. It's going to make them less of a hassle, less of a thing that you have to deal with, less of a chore. It's going to make your deployment simpler and easier because it's going to be very simple and very easy to go, okay, Composer install whatever. And now you have that dependency installed on your server rather than having to mess with all kinds of weird ways that you had to do it before. And if you've ever done it where you did a Git submodule and you edited a Git submodule accidentally, and then you pushed it, and then some of your teammates didn't get the pushed version of the Git submodule for some reason, and now everyone has different versions of a Git submodule. I don't know about you, but that was a pretty common experience. Composer eliminates that issue. So, final thoughts. We should pretty much all be using Composer. If you're not, I would really be asking you why you aren't using Composer today. And even if you never publish a Composer-backed plugin, you'll gain from using Composer for your projects. And I do want to thank the Cake core team again for making Composer work great with Cake 3. It is super, super awesome, and it is super great. And it will make my life so much better. So I would love to take questions, if you have any. Yeah?
What's the biggest Composer JSON file you've ever made?
What's the biggest Composer JSON file I've ever made? So the Composer JSON file tends to be pretty small. Like, I think the biggest one I've ever done is somewhere around, like, I don't know, 70-ish lines or so. If you, Composer then also builds a lock file. Like, there's a composer.lock file that it also writes. And the Composer lock file is the one that says, okay, now we've locked all of our dependencies. And those things become massive. They're like thousands of lines long. But Composer JSON, I don't know, 70-ish lines, give or take, maybe? Not much longer than that. I don't tend to have like 100 dependencies in a project. If I have 100 dependencies in a project, I am seriously questioning what I'm doing.
Have you ever had a problem with, we ran into this at work with status where every time you rebuild the packages, all the checksums change?
Yes.
Did you lock file? Okay, so I'm not the only one?
You're not the only one. There is an option for that. If you check the Composer lock file, there's an option in the, when you generate the lock file, there's an option to not change the hashes for when you've just simply rebuilt everything, but nothing has actually changed. No, when you actually build the Composer lock file, there's an option that says, hey, don't change the stuff.
Check or something that you can, because I assume you're writing it by hand, the composer to JSON?
Is there a syntax check for the composer.json file?
Yeah.
Yes, there is a syntax checker for the composer.json file. The getcomposer.org site, I'm pretty sure that's what it is.
Composer as a command for that. Yeah. You can do run composer check or like that. Validate.
Yeah, there is a, yeah, it's going all off. But there is a, Composer does have somewhere in here to validate your composer.json file. So you can validate it beforehand to make sure that everything's going to work correctly and such. Same thing like Travis. You can validate your Travis stuff beforehand. Any other questions? All the way in the back.
Have you seen or tried Torrent?
Have I seen or tried, what was that?
Torrent, the new tool that Jordi released.
Torrent?
Torrent, it is.
Torrid?
Advanced status. TO.
I have not seen it. I have not seen it or heard of it. Okay. Anything else? I'm done then. Thank you very much.